In today's video, we're taking a look at a variety of NHL trade rumors, including the possibility could the Winnipeg Jets actually trade one of their top players in Kyle Connor. Plus, we're also taking a look at the Habs, the Leafs, the Rangers, and Kings. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of rumors I want to take a look at here today. Most of today's information comes from the Saturday Headlines segment on Hockey Night in Canada, but I also want to take a look at another story in the Winnipeg Free Press as well, indicating that the Winnipeg Jets are apparently getting a lot of calls on their top scorer and forward Kyle Connor. Winnipeg Free Press writer Mike McIntyre in the article outlines that he has a very well-connected source to the NHL, indicating that the Jets are getting a lot of calls and that the main suitor seems to be the Colorado Avalanche. Now, of course, it kind of makes sense in a way for the Avs. I mean, it's been reported that heading into the deadline that they would be looking to add another top six forward. It's not certainly something they have to do, but it would be a nice addition to the club to add another scoring winger for sure. There really, up till now, hasn't been much talk that they'd look to add anything like a Kyle Connor with a long-term contract in place. They've been linked to other players like a Chris Kreider, for example, or even to some degree a Tyler Toffoli. But this is the first that we've heard about a big mega trade possibly being discussed, or at least according to the source of the Winnipeg Free Press. Now, it's also reported here that the main piece that the Avalanche would be offering, if this rumor is actually something being discussed, would be young top prospect defenseman Bowen Byram. Now, the Avalanche already have some young, solid defensemen and stud defensemen, like a guy like Cale Makar and Samuel Girard. Obviously, they drafted Byram in the 2019 NHL draft, and they really have a stocked young blue line with a ton of upside potential longer term. They're obviously going to all need big-time contracts at some point. So trading him would be something that could happen. I'd be a little surprised if they wanted to do it now, but I can see, at some point, one of their top blue liners maybe being moved for help on other aspects of the team here. But if you look over at Winnipeg side of things, clearly they need help on their blue line. That blue line's been absolutely decimated. It wasn't all that long ago they had one of the better blue lines in hockey, one of the top blue lines in the NHL. But of course, they lost several players to free agency, including Myers and Sherratt. They had to trade Jacob Trouba because he wasn't going to sign. And of course, the whole Dustin Byfuglien situation this year, where he basically bailed on the season right before training camp, which was a big surprise to the Jets and something that they haven't been able to replace. He's a unique player, certainly a big time player for them and a leader, provided a lot of offense and physicality and, just a lot of intangibles that they can't replace. So clearly the Jets have been in tough, facing a lot of adversity this year. Like I said, there's no secret they're looking for help on the blue line, and as the Byfuglien situation appears to be getting closer to being resolved, they're going to have some cap space to be able to play with. But I'd be surprised if they wanted to trade a top player like Kyle Connor in order to make that happen. Now, clearly, to some degree, you might be able to argue that their deal maybe makes a little bit of sense, but really overall, I don't see the Jets trading Kyle Connor for a defenseman like Bowen Byram. I mean, Byram's got a ton of potential, could be a top number one pairing guy down the road, but at this point, he hasn't been tested in the NHL. Yes, he's a great prospect, but I think the Jets are going to be more interested in trying to get into win now mode, not so much for the future. And Connor's a player who could be a big part of that future after signing a longer term contract with them this past offseason. So as much as this deal does have some interesting pieces to it, I just really do not see it happening. I'm not surprised that they'd be getting calls on Connor. He's a top player. He's going to outpace himself on his career highs already this year. Certainly appears to be well on his way to doing that. So I'm not surprised that other teams would be calling. Not surprised other teams would be interested. They're trying to take advantage of the fact that the Jets need help on defense, and certainly be inquiring on that. But it doesn't mean a deal is going to be taking place. Doesn't mean the Jets are shopping him at all. And I said, I really do not see a deal like this taking place. Will the Jets add on the blue line? Yes, they will, in due time when they find the right deal. But I don't see Connor being the sacrificial lamb to make that happen. Now let's jump over next and take a look at the player that the Jets are reportedly interested in, and that's Kings defenseman Alec Martinez. The Jets and the Vegas Golden Knights are the two teams that have been heavily scouting the Los Angeles Kings on their current trip here through the eastern part of the U.S. They've been following along with 2 and 3 scouts per game, so clearly they have a variety of things that they're taking a look at, and many believe that Martinez would be the main piece for either club. Both clubs want help on the blue line. I mean, there is a possibility they could be looking at Tyler Toffoli, who's certainly a well-known piece to be likely traded as well. But for both these clubs, I think Martinez probably makes more sense in both cases, and having multiple scouts at multiple games over an extended time when they're not going to be playing that team for a while certainly leads to think that they're looking at some trade possibilities. So Alec Martinez is 32 years old. He's got a year left on his contract. He brings a lot of experience to a team, some Stanley Cup experience as well, a couple rings on his fingers. So clearly he's going to be an attractive commodity as we approach the deadline, which is just over 2 weeks away now. And those are the two teams that appear to be watching him the closest and most likely at this point to land his services in a potential trade. Now let's jump over now and take a look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. This scenario that I'm going to talk about was discussed on Saturday Headlines, plus it was also discussed in an article on TSN by senior reporter Frank Saravalli, and the fact that the Maple Leafs very well might be able to use what they call the Patrick Kane loophole, thing that's basically a way to get around the salary cap for the remainder of the regular season at the deadline to be able to make additions and go into the playoffs a little bit stronger. Essentially, there is no salary cap in the playoffs, so once you get to the end of the regular season, if players were on injured reserve and are able to come back and play, that's really a non-factor for cap purposes at that point in time. So clearly a number of years back when the Hawks were more relevant and having some strong cup contending years, Patrick Kane had a major injury, was out for a big chunk of the season. There was a lot of talk and rumors, which we cannot prove, of course, that he was ready and able to come back before the end of the regular season, but having him sit out on injured reserve until the end of the year allowed them to make more additions and be a stronger team heading into the playoffs. Now, of course, I don't know exactly what all the medical requirements are and all that type of thing, but clearly it was a heavily discussed situation at the time, and many believe now that the Leafs are in a similar situation where they could do that. Not to say that the Leafs would fudge anybody's injuries, I'm not going down that road, but the fact is that they have guys like Morgan Rielly and Cody Ceci and Ilya Mikheyev is still out as well. All three are considered on long-term injury reserve, and if they were to be out for the remainder of the regular season, which at this point we can't say for certain that they would be, it would allow them to potentially add up to $9 million in salary cap space at the deadline, players making that much money to really make a stronger playoff run, which would make a huge difference to their club. Now, they're not the only team in that boat, but clearly the Leafs have already made a trade to address their backup goaltending. They added Kyle Clifford in that deal as well at the forward position, add some grit and experience and all that leadership that he can bring in the bottom six role, and clearly that's something that could be missing as well. But now they turn their attention to the blue line, and they very well could add a blue liner with a bigger salary who's can have much more of an impact. They have a lot of guys on their roster who are pending UFAs on the blue line, and clearly it'd be easy if they add a player now with a lot of term and bigger contract. They wouldn't have to worry so much about the future because they very well might not be planning on bringing back some of their UFA defensemen anyway who could offset the costs associated with taking on another big-time contract. So it certainly could be a way for the Leafs to add a big-time defenseman, address that need now, and move on. Of course, they've been linked to several players. Of course, I mentioned before that it was discussed that they apparently did inquire on Matt Dumba with the Minnesota Wild. There was some talk as well about Josh Manson in Anaheim. I'm not really sure Manson would be up for grabs. I think they'd really have to make the Ducks a phenomenal deal that they just could not refuse, but I do think it's possible, but I think it's less likely just given the fact that the Ducks don't seem to have any appetite to trade Manson. But I think Bob Murray would have to listen if they came in with a spectacular offer that, like I said, they just could not turn away. And there's also some other defensemen around the league that certainly would make sense as well. But I think Kyle Dubas is going to be looking ideally for somebody with term here. It's not somebody that's necessarily on the rental market. They might have to go that route if they can't work out another deal. But either way, they do have some advantages here with the long-term injury reserve relief that they can get with the cap, add lots of money, really bulk up for the playoffs and make a run for it here at a potential Stanley Cup. Next up, let's talk about their division rival, the Montreal Canadiens. Now, of course, we saw Ilya Kovalchuk and the Habs have a big game against the Leafs again last night on Hockey Night. Kovalchuk again with the overtime winner. He's been an absolute phenomenal pickup by Montreal since he's signed with the team not too long ago. Now, Ilya Kovalchuk's also been a name mentioned in trade rumors that the Habs could flip by the deadline to get back another asset, and there apparently is a lot of interest from a handful of teams, including the Boston Bruins, Edmonton Oilers, and possibly even the Calgary Flames. Now, he's on a league minimum contract. He's certainly outplaying that kind of a contract right now. It certainly expires at the end of the season, but he's been a nice fit in Montreal, so you can't help but wonder the dilemma that Marc Bergevin now has. It has also been reported in previous interviews with Kovalchuk that he didn't really seem all that interested, or at least not yet, in talking about a new contract or an extension to stay in Montreal. Doesn't mean he wouldn't want to. He just kind of basically said he wanted to see how a little bit more time played out before they could really have those discussions. Ultimately, I do think Bergevin will have that talk with Kovalchuk and his agent ahead of the deadline, kind of see what the player wants. But he made it known that he really wanted to chase the Stanley Cup. And at this point, Montreal's not out of the playoff picture, but it's not going to be easy to get in. And even if they do get in, they're going to be a lower seed. So not to say it can't happen. Anything can happen. As you can see in the past, you get into playoffs and anything is certainly possible. But should Montreal trade Ilya Kovalchuk is a big question mark. It's believed that they're looking to get at least a second-round pick if they do make the move. But with these other teams showing a lot of interest, it might be a difficult choice for Bergevin. Ultimately, it's going to come down if Kovalchuk wants to extend or not. If he feels like Kovalchuk's going to go to another club in the offseason, he's likely going to move him. But I guess we'll see. But of course, if you're a Habs fan, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. I know they've been dealing with a lot of injuries this year, and it could very well put Kovalchuk in a different spot in the lineup next season if he were to stick around. So should they move Kovalchuk and get another asset in return, or should they consider keeping him around for another 1 or 2 year contract extension? Sticking with Montreal momentarily, there's also been some talk that I've been getting a lot of calls on forward Thomas Tatar. Now, of course, Tatar has been a very nice addition since he was acquired in the Max Pacioretty trade. Clearly, again, as I mentioned before, I don't think this is a player that Montreal is looking to trade, but clearly when you have a player who's performed well and teams are looking for that type of player near the deadline, then there's going to be talk about potential teams inquiring. So it doesn't mean Marc Bergevin makes a trade, but there has been links to teams, again, like the Oilers, the Flames, as well as the Penguins. Many believe the Penguins to stand the best chance to make the biggest offer to potentially make the Marc Bergevin listen and possibly consider the trade. But again, no guarantees that Tatar really goes anywhere. I think he's been a great addition to Montreal. And like I said, I don't think Bergevin is looking to blow anything up here. I think they might do some minor tinkering with the roster and kind of reset next year, hopefully stay healthy, because they do seem to believe that they have enough pieces in place with their current roster to be a better team and a playoff team as early as next season. And not to say that they can't make the playoffs this year. It's just going to be a tough second half of the season here to make it happen, but anything is possible, as we've seen before. One more piece here on Montreal as well. It's believed that the Carolina Hurricanes have been scouting the Habs a bit lately and are likely showing interest in some of their defensemen, possibly Marco Scandella and Brent Kulak. Of course, as we know, they've lost Dougie Hamilton to a major injury. Going to be like Hamilton will be out for the rest of the season, so they certainly want to add on the blue line heading into the playoffs. Carolina is certainly not a guaranteed playoff team at this point, but certainly have a strong chance of making it. They're in a pretty good standings position right now, and certainly a guy like Kulak or Scandella could add some extra depth. They're not going to be able to replace exactly what Hamilton was providing them, but having somebody come in, especially like a Scandella who's got a bit more experience, could very well be a nice depth piece. Scandella's not really known for the offensive flair that Hamilton was, but it's still somebody back there on the blue line who can play a decent amount of minutes and be somewhat steady defensively and bring that experience to the roster. Could be a good addition. So I guess we'll see. The Hurricanes are watching the Habs closely on the defensive front, apparently, but they're also looking at some other teams as well. So I do expect Don Waddell and the Hurricanes to add on the blue line, and that's the latest information we have on players that they might be considering. And lastly here, I want to talk about the New York Rangers and forward Chris Kreider, who certainly seems to be the biggest fish in the pool of rental players heading into the NHL Trade Deadline this season. Right now, there is talks, though, that the contract extension talks between the Rangers and Kreider's camp are expected to finally be getting underway over the next couple of days here. There was reports last week that they might be getting started soon. I'm led to believe so far that hasn't actually physically taken place as of yet, but in the next couple of days there will be talks ongoing to talk about a potential contract extension. Of course, as we've seen in the last few years with the Rangers going through this rebuild, they've been selling off a lot of veteran forwards, and many believe Kreider would be the next one in a long line of players for that to happen to. But at the same time, they do need guys to stick around and are veterans that can lead the younger players. And Chris Kreider, even though he's not as young as he used to be, certainly has great wheels, great speed, can score, is having a great season, and certainly provided a lot of reasons why New York should consider keeping him around. So we'll see what happens, but obviously those contract talks are going to likely determine whether he stays or whether he goes for sure. And you got to remember as well, he is on a contract year, so there's lots of reasons to believe that the production he's putting up this year might be a little bit more challenging for him to put up on a continuous basis on a longer term contract. So I guess we'll see what the Rangers' appetite is to bring him back, but they are talking about a possible extension, and there's no guarantee that he will indeed be traded ahead of the NHL Trade Deadline coming up on February the 24th. That is all your latest news updates for today. So, of course, as always, want to know your thoughts and opinions and everything discussed. So make sure you leave lots of comments so we can discuss further in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.